What makes this crazy true crime story even more insane is that I personally knew the killers. On September 29th in 2014 in Apple Valley, California, my hometown, the police were called after hearing shots at about 9:40 p.m. Upon arriving at the crime scene on Muni Road, they would discover, unfortunately, the unalived body of Army Specialist Daniel Yarborough. During the initial canvassing, they would come across this gentleman, Wesley Swank, who would reveal to the police officers that Daniel was in that area because he was going to attend a Bible study with him, Wesley Swank, and his brother-in-law and sister. Wesley and Daniel were both known to be very good friends, and even some considered them to be as close as brothers, as they both served as Army reservists at Fort Irwin in Barstow. Wesley would then point the detectives in the direction of where he was originally from, Daniel, in Victorville, just a neighboring town. So the police would head on over to Victorville and they would interview his roommate, Ruben Vegas, who would let them know that a lot of strange things were starting to happen around Daniel. How a couple of weeks prior to his unaliving, someone had broken into their house. Now, they had no idea who it was, but nothing seemed taken or nothing seemed destroyed in any way, shape, or form, so they didn't even bother to report it to police. However, not too long after that, maybe a couple days or so, somebody had opened fire on Daniel while he was just driving down the street. At first, the police were thinking this might be gang-related activity. Roommate Ruben would even say, yeah, it seemed like it was gang stuff. But Daniel wasn't part of any gang whatsoever. And so they had no idea what these instances were about. They just kind of wrote them off as two unrelated incidents. Now, the case was actually becoming pretty close to getting cold when they received a phone call from Wesley Swank. And if you remember Wesley, he was the one who had invited Daniel over for the Bible study. And he tells the police that Daniel Yarborough has put his life insurance policy in Wesley's name. Most likely, you're thinking what the cops were thinking at the time, that this doesn't make any sense. Why would somebody put their best friend or closest friend on a life insurance policy over family? It didn't make any sense. But when they had talked to the sister of Daniel, Felicia Oliphant, they discovered that, yes, indeed, he had actually done that. He had actually put his life insurance in Wesley's name. Then later on, she would receive a copy in the mail of that life insurance policy after he had passed away. And again, it was in Wesley's name. However, Felicia had noticed that maybe it may have been forged. She couldn't be 100% sure, but she was almost positive that the documents that she had found were forged. So right now, Wesley Swank is their number one suspect, but they don't have a whole lot of evidence to convict him, and they wanted a rock-solid case. That is until a completely random house fire further in Apple Valley cracked the whole case wide open. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Wesley and his family. He comes from a family of 16 kids. One more time, 16 kids, okay? His parents were basically stay-at-home parents, and they lived off the government, for lack of a better word. 16 kids, that's a lot of money. Unfortunately, in the late 2000s, around 2009, the father, Richard Swank, would be arrested, tried, and convicted of abuse against his own children. And really just let your mind wander a little bit about what kind of things he did. Things that he did, I cannot say on here because it is too graphic, but needless to say, what he was convicted of garnered a sentence of at least 90 some odd years. So essentially the rest of his miserable life. As far as I'm aware, the mother was not convicted, but I could be wrong about that. I'm not entirely sure. During the house fire, one of the Swank children, Melissa Anderson, was talking to her sister about what was going on, about what had happened. Now, it's not entirely sure how or why the house fire even started, but police assumed it was arson, but nobody was ever convicted of that. So, while Melissa was talking to her sister about it, her sister just off the cuff mentioned, I wonder if this is about the Yarborough case. And Melissa had no idea who Yarborough was. She didn't know who Daniel she didn't know really about any of this. But after doing some clickety-clack on the internet, she was able to find out who Daniel Yarborough was and what the case was going on. And she instantly had the thought going through her mind that Wesley Swank, her own brother, was involved in this somehow. But again, the cops don't have any evidence, but Wes is their number one suspect, so what are they going to do? Bravely, Melissa decided to wear a wire. And so, the next time she would meet with her brother, Wesley, she was able to get all the information that she was able to. In fact, she even said that while it was scary to have to wear a wire and do all that, she wasn't conflicted at all. She went and she did it. So in January of 2015, they were finally confident enough to arrest Wesley Swank. After intense interrogation, he gave up his other two conspirators. There was himself, the trigger man, his younger brother Logan, who was now in Texas or Oklahoma, one of the two, but they were able to arrest and extradite him back to Apple Valley, California. And the other was Joseph Bradshaw, his brother-in-law, who had set up the Bible study at his house. Bradshaw's wife had nothing to do with it. Ultimately, Logan and Wesley would be given separate trials, but both would be convicted to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Thomas, not Joseph, would accept a plea deal and would be released from prison a little bit later. Now we've come to the part you've all probably been waiting for. How did I know these guys? Well, I knew Wesley. I knew Wesley Swank. He was about a year older than me. I was a freshman, he was a sophomore, that kind of thing. We were all members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or Mormons, and I would occasionally run into Wesley at different activities. Now, this may come as a shock to a lot of you watching this, but I was actually a pretty big loser in high school, okay? I was the nerd, I wasn't really liked, didn't have a whole lot of friends, and Wesley was this cool, charming, black leather jacket wearing cool guy, and he, reached out to me and took an interest in me, and we were friends. We were cool with each other. And everything is kind of spoken in hindsight now, because at the time, I was just glad that somebody was paying attention to me. A cool kid like Wesley was paying attention to me. A real ladies' man like Wesley was paying attention to me. And he was a ladies' man. He had girlfriends. He had girls. He had all kinds of girls just hanging off his arms. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But, I was flattered that somebody with that charming and magnetic of a personality took an interest in me. Looking back on it now, a lot of the other kids that I knew that were seen as maybe a little bit more confident, maybe a little bit more sure of themselves, they didn't like Wesley as much. And honestly, I couldn't understand why they didn't at the time. The one thing that I did notice about Wesley that always kind of rubbed me the wrong way about him was his treatment of women. I remember one young lady in particular, and I can't remember her name, but she had an unhealthy obsession with Wesley. Now, that obsession, don't get me wrong, was fostered by him. He would give her attention, then pull back, stop giving her attention, and it was just a very, very toxic relationship between them. It was so bad that her parents had to actually send her off to live with family members to essentially cut the two of them off. That's how bad these two were with each other. And he was just not a very good person. Again, I didn't see it because all I see is this cool kid paying attention to the nerdy kid. Something else that I was made aware of after I was recording this video is that my sister actually lived a couple houses down from where this happened, and she remembered hearing the shots. So that's pretty terrifying right there. I guess in the end, you just never know. You just never know with who you're gonna meet up with. And he and we drifted apart. I never saw him after I left California, and I never really stayed in contact with him. So once I had heard about what he had done, I was shocked and amazed. I wasn't too surprised to learn that he was the mastermind behind it, because I knew that he could be a bit manipulative when he wanted to be. And in the end, he's not even a victim in this anyways. The victim, Daniel Yarborough, put his trust in the wrong person. And as far as I know, I think his family is still struggling with the life insurance payout because of all the forgeries. That story's wild. Have you guys met any killers? Let me know. Comments below.